Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 30-Minute Gospel. My name is Chris, and I'll be your host as we open and study the Bible together. I'll be reading from the King James Version, but you can feel free to read whichever translation that best suits you. I would just recommend that you have a version that does not delete verses from God's holy word. Each video will be a biblical teaching of 30 minutes or less. My material is completely 100% free, so you can share these videos with family members, co-workers, friends, or anyone you know who either needs to hear the Word of God or wants to study it in a casual setting. The gospel is free to all, so I will not accept any donations, gifts, or beg viewers for money. Please give to your local church or Christian organization of your choosing. You can reach out to me with questions at 30minutegospel@gmail.com, but please keep your messages respectful and cordial. Well, welcome back, everybody, to the 30-Minute Gospel. And we're continuing on a subject, like I said, it's probably been triggering to some of y'all, but it is one that needs to be discussed because it's something that has been forgotten among the Christian community, and that's about the health principles in the Bible. That's what we've been talking about. Now, I begin every video of these saying that this is not a salvation issue, okay? This does not have to do anything with your salvation, whether you're saved or not. And whether you do these things or not is not necessarily it's not detrimental to where your soul is going to go after you die and for the resurrection. It has nothing to do with that. But what it does is it affects your health now. It affects your health now. That's what it has to do. I'm also not going to be bashing doctors or the medical community during this. Anything the medical community does do some amazing things, but they do make mistakes in some places. And so it's not a bash on that. And I'm not telling you to stop taking your medicine either. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the Bible and health, and we have made it very, very clear in the first two videos in Genesis 1:29, in Genesis 3:18, in Leviticus 19:23, and Psalm 104:14. It talks about how God defines food. God says He's given you plants and vegetables, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and grains as your food. That is what you should be eating, probably 80 to 90% of the time. Okay, that's what he did. And if you're not eating vegetables at all, I've heard some people say in their life, they say, I don't like vegetables. Okay, well, God gives you that choice, but if you don't eat vegetables, you're going to be sick. Sickness is going to come because your body needs that. It needs vegetables. If you are eating bioengineered foods, bioengineered, as I explained in the last video, is they've taken what God has made. Okay, they have taken what God has made and they've turned it into like this thing that looks like food, but it's not. I'm almost convinced bioengineered food is from Satan. It looks like something, Satan sometimes makes himself appear or makes things appear like it's godly, but it's really not. And I think that that's what he's done with our food supply, is that this stuff looks like food, but it's not. They've bioengineered things. They're bioengineering. That's why it's probably best if you can eat organic as much as you can. If they're doing any bioengineered, like if you get any bioengineered lettuce, let's say, I don't even know if they can bioengineer, but they do that. Don't eat that. That's not lettuce at that point. It's man's attempt to create what God has done, and it's not going to work. They're never going to get it like it. It's not going to be the same. The body's not going to recognize it. Okay, and it's going to make you sick. It may look like it, but they're never going to perfect it. That's what the book Frankenstein taught us about, right? Frankenstein was trying to create life. Dr. Frankenstein was trying to create life. In a laboratory. He couldn't do it. Why? Because man is flawed. Only one person can create life, and that's God. That's what the whole story is of that book. And what the whole, premise is. And we can't create these things. Okay? We get things that look like godly food, but their body's not going to recognize it. Okay. And just so you guys know this, I'm just going to mention some names. I'm not saying. Now. I mentioned some names in the Christian community. Some of these people you're going to know that follow this principle. They followed this principle, and they lived a very, very long life. They followed this godly principle. One of those people was Lester Roloff. Lester Roloff was an independent fundamental Baptist preacher who believed in only eating what the Bible said to eat. Okay? And the man was healthy as a horse. He was healthy. He only died in a plane accident. That's how he died, but he was perfectly healthy. He was up in a plane and fine. No real issues. Another man was a man by the name of George Malcolmus. George Malcolmus just died last year. George Malcolmus was a Baptist preacher. He got colon cancer. Went to see at 40 something years old in the 70s. Went to see Lester Roloff, and Lester Roloff, who was a friend of his, told him that you need to be eating what God ate. And so he ate what the Bible said to eat. Within a year, his tumor was gone, and the man lived a healthy life without getting sick. I think he had a stroke a little bit, but that was from stress. But even after the stroke, he lived another 22 years, or 22 years after his stroke. He was healthy as a horse, traveling, doing things, never sick, preaching, teaching that. He opened up Hallelujah Acres to teach people what to eat. And he did well. Charles Stanley wrote the foreword to Jordan Rubin's book. Now, Jordan Rubin is partners with Josh Axe, and they're Bible Bible believing Christians who put forth healthy eating and these sorts of things. Charles Stanley wrote the foreword to one of Jordan Rubin's books. He implemented these things in his life, and he ended up living to 90 years old, and he was still preaching, still healthy. Still preaching up there. Okay, so that's another person that followed it. Of course, there's been others. These are some people I'm going to mention within the Christian community. I'm not saying I agree with all of them, but there are other people. According to what I heard, there's a preacher in Atlanta. He has a very, very large church. I'm not going to mention his name because, of course, he's more controversial than someone like Charles Stanley or Lester Roloff. But his daughter, from what I heard, was having issues with her asthma, and it was getting so bad that she was basically almost on death's door. And he took her to a naturopathic doctor who implemented these things that are in the Bible, and his daughter's fine now, doing well. There's another pastor who did that. He was preaching until he was in his late 80s, and he was still fine. And his wife got cancer in like 1990 or 91, and she did take the chemo and all of that, and did surgery. But afterwards, she began eating this exact same diet that we're talking about, the biblical diet, and she is still alive today. No cancer. Nothing. So you can see that there's been many people that have implemented this and have talked about this. Jordan Rubin has spoken in many, many churches, and so has Josh Axe. They've spoken in many churches about this, and it's a very important thing to understand that's what God has given you. But we talked about this, that in the last video we talked about 1 Timothy 4:3-4. It says all things that God has created. Okay, all things that God has created is good. So it's saying all things that God has created. And as I said last time, there are a lot of things in the grocery store that God didn't create. The stuff that God created in the grocery store are on the outside of the middle aisles. Like I said, that's your dairy, your meats, your fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, grains, these sorts of things. That is what He has created, and it's on the outside. The inside is what man has created. Okay? Man created that. And as I said, just because God allows man to create something does not mean that it is what is good for us. I use the atomic bomb as the example. God allowed man to create the atomic bomb. God allowed us to create machine guns and lots of things. That doesn't mean it's good for us. High fructose corn syrup is not good for you. It's not. God's given you cane sugar or stevia. Okay, man created sweet and low. Okay, and all of that, those fake sugars. That's what man has created, and the body doesn't recognize it as poison, and that's why some of them have been linked to cancer. It says on the packet, it's been linked to it. It's because it's not what you're supposed to be eating. Okay, that's not what you're supposed to be eating. You're not supposed to be. You're not supposed to be eating. Um, you know, Twinkies. That's not what you're supposed to be eating. As somebody once said, I watched this one guy, he said this one time, he says, and it's actually true, if you look at the foods the way God has designed them, they look like the body part they're good for. Okay? Like if you cut open a carrot and you look at the carrot on the inside, it looks like an eye. Well, carrots are good for your eyesight, the vitamin A. That's what it's good for. If you open up if you look at a walnut, walnuts are good for your brain. And they look like a little brain. It's divided up. Kidney beans. They're called kidney beans. They're in the shape of your kidneys. They're good for your kidneys. Tomatoes are good for your heart. They look like hearts. Ginger looks like your stomach. It's good for your stomach. Sweet potatoes are good for your pancreas. They look like that. And he says, what do Twinkies and candy bars look like? They look like coffins. Because if you eat those things all the time, that's where you're heading. You're heading for an early death. Why die before your time, as God says? People, I believe, because of their diets, have died before their time. I think many people have died before their time. They had more potential, but because of their diets, they ended up dying at younger ages than they should have, maybe at 51, 52. Okay, and there's so many misnomers when you look at the medical community. I was listening to a cardiologist one time, and he said something. He said the word heart attack has been misnamed. And I was like, misnamed? He's like yeah, there's really no such thing as a heart attack. And I was like, I kind of sat back and I'm like, my grandfather had a heart attack. I was kind of like, what is this guy talking about? I know people that have had heart attacks. My grandfather had a heart attack. And he said, yes, there are legitimate heart attacks, but they're very few and far between. There are times when people have genetic things wrong with their heart. He said, the truth is, we attack our hearts and then our hearts give up. That is the truth. Most people, if you talk to most doctors, most heart attacks that happen are because people are eating things and clogging up their arteries, and that's why it happens. It's because of people's poor diets. Type 2 diabetes is a completely 100% man-made disease. People are eating too much sugar. That's what's going on. I used to have a lady that we knew that was friends with my wife, and she'd known him for a long time. She had type 2 diabetes. She was on dialysis. She was really bad. Her type 2 diabetes was really bad, and she was on dialysis. But every time we went over to her house, she had candies and cookies, and she was a Christian. She was a very big Christian too. Went to her church, was a very big Christian. But as the Bible said, my people are being destroyed for lack of knowledge. She was being destroyed for lack of knowledge. That's what she was doing. Type 2 diabetes is a completely 100% man-made disease. Now, we're not talking about type 1. Type 1 is a genetic problem. But type 2 is. And did you know, like a lot of diseases are just usually a deficiency in things? A lot of them are. Scurvy is a deficiency in vitamin. Usually most diseases are either a deficiency or a toxicity. That's what they are. If you have scurvy, you're low in vitamin C. If you have rickets, you're low in vitamin D. Okay? If you have um, type 2 diabetes, you're toxic in sugar. Does that make sense? Usually, if you get cancer, it's toxic in some way. There's some sort of toxicity. Like if you get lung cancer, usually it's because most people that get lung cancer are people that have been smoking or around cigarette smoke. That is what causes it. That's a toxicity of that. There's too much of that poison in the system. Okay? That's what happens with most people. All right. Most digestive issues. Why do people have most digestive issues? They have digestive issues because they're eating stuff that's inflammatory to the system. That's what it is. What's inflammatory to the system? The stuff that is not that God did not design for you to eat. And I don't care if as a Christian, and I don't care. I used to do it myself. Look at me. I'm just as guilty about this. I want everybody to know this. I'm just as guilty. I used to drink Diet Dr. Peppers like there was no tomorrow. I ate Lucky Char. I could eat Lucky Charms all day long. Donuts, peanut M&Ms. I was eating all of that. I was eating all of it. Potato chips. I was eating all of that on a regular basis. Not occasionally, but on a regular basis. And then I wondered why I had so much digestive issues. Because all those things are not what God designed me to eat. I was inflaming the system. It causes inflammation. And because I was not eating what I should have been eating, I was inflamed in the system, and then I had all these problems. It starts showing up in other places when the inflammation goes in there. Sometimes you'll have sinus issues and headaches. That's why do you think people with migraines, they say don't eat foods that trigger it? What are the foods that usually trigger it? The foods that usually trigger a migraine are foods you're not supposed to be eating. It's not what God said for you to eat. They say don't eat chocolate. Don't take caffeine or whatever. It's like all these things. Don't eat sugar. Those are the things that causes the migraines. Okay? And that's what a lot of diseases are. If you've got cramping in your legs, what is that? That's a deficiency in calcium or magnesium or whatever. It's calcium, magnesium, potassium. It's one of the electrolytes. Okay? And you can be destroyed for a lack of knowledge even when you're doing something good. That's why you have to take care of yourself. You really have to do that. I thought I was doing something really well, and then this past year I took my blood and I found out I was very high in vitamin B6. Vitamin B6 can be very toxic. I took too much of it. I didn't realize it. I could have killed myself. I was being destroyed for lack of knowledge. See, I'm just as guilty with this, but you've got to maintain it. You've got to do the work. Many people I even see amongst the Christian community, they just don't want to do the work. And I don't want you to believe there's kind of a false statement that goes around. Well, you're really in good health because it's your genetics. That's not true, because my genetics is not very good. I have got scoliosis in my spine, in the base of my spine. I've had digestive issues. I've had sinus issues. I've had all these sorts of things. But what I had to do is I had to do the work on myself. And if you will do the work, I feel good most of the time. Now I go to sleep and I sleep well. I feel well. I've got lots of energy. But it's a lot of work. You have to take care of yourself. It's not just genetics. I know what it's like. I don't have good genetics when it comes to that. I have digestive issues. I've got liver issues. I've got all these things, but I do the things necessary to take care of myself so that I feel well. How do I know what to do? The Bible tells me. And it's amazing when I started eating the fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and grains, it's amazing how all that inflammation went away. It all went away. Within 2 or 3 weeks, my hunger returned. I started feeling good. I started sleeping well. My sinuses cleared up. My teeth started looking white and shiny like they should. My skin color returned. I didn't look so gray and palish. I lost weight. I was 165 pounds. I lost weight. I had the energy to go back to weightlifting. It's amazing. But that's what I'm saying. Just because man allows you to create something doesn't mean that it's good. Let me go over here to Leviticus. Let me go over here. Leviticus chapter 2. I want you to read this with me. Again, we're going back to Leviticus chapter 2. All right. Verses 1 through 10. I may not read it all, but it says it several times in this thing. Um it says, and when any will offer a meat offering unto the Lord, his offering shall be of fine flour, and he shall put oil upon it and put frankincense in thereof. Okay? So when he's talking about meat, he's talking about a grain offering and then making bread. Okay? But notice what it says. It says, it shall be made of fine flour. Okay? Our breads today are not made of fine flour. They're not. Wonder Bread, and I'm going to read this to you. I'm going to pull this up. I'm just going to read this to you. Wonder Bread today it was a perfect example. Here's what is in this one Wonder Bread. It says, it is made, these are the ingredients: unbleached enriched flour, wheat flour, malted barley flour, niacin, reduced iron, thiamine, mononitrate, riboflavin, folic acid, water, sugar, yeast. Contains 2% or less of each of the following. Calcium carbonate. Now the calcium carbonate's in there. They'll say it's a preservative, but really I think what it does is it neutralizes the stomach acid, because this is going to inflame your stomach. And calcium carbonate, which is Tums, neutralizes your stomach acid. Wheat gluten, soybean oil, salt, dough conditioners. Contains one or more of the following: sodium sterolol lactylate, calcium sterolol lactylate, monoglycerides, mono and diglycerides, distilled monoglycerides, calcium peroxide, calcium iodate, datim, ethoxylated mono and diglyceride. I don't even know how to pronounce half of these things. Enzymes: ascorbic acid, vinegar, monocalcium phosphate, citric acid, cholecalciferol. I can never pronounce it. That's vitamin D that they add to it. Soy lecithin, calcium propionate it says to stop spoilage. Okay, so that's just from there. Now, Wonder Bread before, whenever you see enriched flour, you need to think of the word impoverished. What that means is that they have taken out all of the good nutrients in the bread and then added back into everything that they added in, which is synthetic from a lab. That's what that means. What they've done is they have basically removed the fiber. A lot of them. Wonder Bread initially back in the 50s, I think they called it Wonder Bread because it was any wonder that you could digest it and then pass it out in a bowel movement. I think that's the wonder behind it all. Because they took out all the wheat. They took out all the wheat which has the fiber in it. Okay. There's a word that's in there. If you know what's in wheat, wheat is gluten. Okay, gluten has a word in it. If you know anything about white flour, what they used to use white flour with, if they did not use it in cooking, was they took it, put some water in it, and they used it to hang wallpaper. Okay, why? Because it's glue. That's where the word gluten comes from. Glue. It's glue. It's sticky. It's a sticky substance. Okay? What gluten is natural in wheat. That's fine because it has the fiber. The fiber helps you pass the gluten in your system. The fiber helps to do that. It helps to pass it. But when you take the fiber out of it, all it is left is glue. And what does that thing do? When you eat it, it sticks to your stomach, it sticks to your bowels and everything else, and then you have problems digesting foods and absorbing nutrients. It becomes glue. And we have so many people that have gluten problems now, when that was never the problem. Because we're not eating fine flour. Okay? This is not, sometimes they used to bleach the flour. It used to say bleach flour, enriched flour. That is not what God created. God created wheat. And you take the wheat and you make wheat flour out of it. And you keep all that stuff in it. All it should take is wheat. And you know, God a lot of times told you not to put yeast in it. He told the Jews not to put yeast in their bread. Why? The yeast is the full of the carb part of it. That yeast spoils the bread. It makes the bread bigger because when you don't have it, it's basically a cracker. That's what unleavened bread is. It's a cracker. If you buy it in the grocery store. But you put the wheat in it, it makes it bigger. I mean, the yeast in it, it makes it bigger. But the yeast is what makes it spoil. And the yeast, that's why Jesus said, "Be careful of the yeast of the Pharisees, because yeast spoils. It's like sin." Okay, so he said, "Don't put that in there." Because he told the Jews not to do that, because if they put the yeast in the bread when they were in the wilderness, it wouldn't last as long. If they put the yeast in there, it would cause it to spoil. But the yeast is where all the carbs are. That's when it becomes very carb, intense. Okay? So that's not fine flour, though. Enriched, you're supposed to take wheat flour, what God created, and make bread. That's what they did in the old times. That's what they did then. That was bread. What we have today is basically bioengineered bread. It's a Frankenstein bread. Your body doesn't recognize it. So when your body's eating this Frankenstein bread, it's causing inflammation. And then it's recognizing the gluten that's in there as a foreign invader, and that's why so many people have these gluten intolerance problems. You see? That's why it's important to eat organic bread. That's why you need to eat organic bread if you can find it made with organic wheat flour. That's what it needs to be made with. And your body will recognize it. But we've grown up so much on this bleached, white, enriched flour that still has the gluten in it. And it's caused our bodies to be inflamed, and it looks at the gluten like it's a foreign invader, and then it attacks it. Okay, so I hope you guys got something out of that. We'll stop it here. We'll continue on. There's going to be many more of these teachings because we got a lot to go through with these. But I hope you got something out of this. Like I always say, if you would please subscribe to the channel, like the video, hit the subscribe button. Share this video with anybody you know who may need it, needs to hear this truth. I know it's probably triggering to some of y'all, but it's got to be preached. I've got to teach it. It's something that I feel very passionate about because I was in a lot of y'all's shoes. If you have any comments for me or anything that you'd like to talk about, my email is 30minutegospel@gmail.com. That 30 is 30. It's also available on my Facebook page. I have a Facebook page for y'all to follow if you want to follow, and also it's available on my YouTube channel and in the description of the video. Okay, please no vile or ugly comments. I will not read them, and I will not respond to them. So you're just kind of wasting your time. All right, and I always like to leave you with this. Remember, just as Theodore Roosevelt once said, a thorough knowledge of the Bible is worth more than a college education. God bless you all.